when I thought about the gear of God's providence, I understood God's providence to some level. But when I understood the gear of God's providence, that particular one, I didn't like it. And I for years, I was just kind of grumbling, like in my mind, over this, how terrible this is, and how am I ever going to get the training that I need? I basically have to start over at square one. I have no college. I have no seminary. No church is going to take me as a pastor without any of those things. And now I'm some 28 years removed from that, and I can see things differently. And I can see how God did orchestrate the events of my life to do exactly what he wanted, and much better than what it would have been if I'd gone that other path.
Dr. Elwart, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we want to talk a little bit about contentment. This is a session you've been preparing for the upcoming ACBC conference. And so as you've thought about it, what is contentment?
I really like Robert Jones's definition from his article on contentment in the Journal of Biblical Counseling. He calls it consciously enjoying God's goodness no matter the circumstances. And I think he gets that from Philippians 4, where Paul talks about knowing how to be content in whatever circumstances he's in, whether he's in prosperity or whether he's suffering need. So it's simply enjoying God's goodness despite those circumstances.
Yeah. An interesting word in that definition, though, is consciously enjoying it. Like, this is something that has to be front of mind, something you're actually thinking about.
Exactly. Yeah, it's something that we have to work towards, because it's not something that we just wait for or that we hope comes around. We have to be working towards it. Paul talks about it in those terms. He says, I have learned. So that tells us it's something that we need to work at. It's not something that we just automatically get when we become a Christian. There is, I would say, a level of contentment we get when we become a Christian, because we have the Spirit of God in us, and he's starting to build in us that joy or contentment that grows over time, but it's something that we have to work at.
Yeah. Why is this, as we think about growing in contentment and the Christian life, why is this important to how we follow Christ?
I think there are at least two reasons. One, I think God demands it. I think a close sibling to contentment is joy, and we're called to rejoice in the Lord always. And contentment is something that we should have always. Paul says he learned how to do it in every circumstance. So it's something that is part of the character of God, and something that he demands in us. And I think the second one that comes to mind is that a contented life is the best life that we can have here. If John Calvin says it this way, that man can never be poor in mind who is satisfied with the lot which has been assigned to him by God. So we can never be shaken or saddened or poor in the sense in the worst, most oppressed kind of states that we can see in this world if we're content. So it is the best way to live life, because circumstances can come or go, and we can still have this confidence in God's goodness.
Yeah. And it would, if we're not being content, I mean, what might that look like? Because that's gonna sideline any of our service for Christ if we're constantly focused on what I don't have, what I'm not, what I wish I could do. How might that show up in our life?
Yeah, I think like the opposite of contentment, obviously, it's discontentment or bitterness. It's really having, if you think about Jones's definition again, it's really resenting God's goodness rather than enjoying God's goodness, consciously enjoying it. It's consciously resenting it or consciously questioning God's goodness in all kinds of circumstances. Now, it tends not to be in every circumstance, because there are some circumstances we love better than others. But in a lot of different circumstances that we don't like, we question God's goodness. Is God really there? Does he care? Is he on my side? And it just it eats at a person, and it tends to feed off of itself as well. That kind of bitterness. We tend to have this soured look at life, and it tends to be a spiral, have a spiraling kind of effect.
Yeah, and I think it shows sometimes that when we're not content in circumstances, I mean, number one, we've let the circumstance, rule our life instead of being ruled by the Word of God and what it says. But I think we show sometimes that we don't recognize rightly who God is. if we have at the front of our mind the gospel that I am a sinner and that God is gracious no matter what circumstance I'm in, like Paul can find himself in jail and think this is an undeserved kindness from God. We've really gotten stuff backwards when we start being discontent or bitter, like what you're talking about.
I think that's the way to think about it. Paul's a great example for that, because in that passage in Philippians 4, he says, even when I suffered need. So we would expect you have to have at least your needs met. But Paul's saying, I actually suffered need, and I still learned how to be content. And that's because his contentment was not based on his circumstances. That word content in Philippians 4 comes from the same cognate as sufficiency in 2 Corinthians 9:8, where Paul says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that always having all sufficiency or all contentment in everything, you have an abundance for every good deed. So really, contentment is the idea of I have enough. And just like you were saying, it's recognizing the graces that we've experienced, so that if I am in prison, I have enough because I have God. Robert Jones says it this way: if our hearts are confident in God's goodness only when we have good things, then our confidence is not in God's goodness, but it's in the things. And I think that's a good revealing way to express this and to think about it, because if my contentment, so to speak, wavers based on my circumstances, then I don't have my contentment fixed in the right place, or I don't have contentment, maybe is a better way to say it. Jeremiah Burroughs wrote a book called, he was a Puritan preacher, and he wrote a book called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. It's an excellent book, and in there he says, many people think that if I had what another person had, how happy and comfortable I would live. But if you're a Christian, whatever your condition, you have enough within yourself. And he's not talking about, just got to pull up the bootstraps or whatever, but it is about actually having enough in yourself, and that Christ is in you, and you should be satisfied in that alone. You don't need anything else, and that should be enough.
Yeah, and it shows that we have all we need for life and godliness. So we have what we need, even though we may experience legitimate physical need. We have what we need in the moment through the Word, prayer, and the church to actually live for God, to do the God-honoring thing in that circumstance. We don't have to look outside of it. What are some challenges to contentment? So, as we want to grow in this, we want to grow in God and trusting in God's goodness and being confident in Him. What maybe are some barriers to that?
I think by nature we are not content. So like I was saying, when we come to Christ, I think there's a level of contentment that we receive because we have this new joy and the grace that God's given to us. But by nature, our sin nature is constantly leaning towards discontentment, bitterness, critical, judgmental kind of spirit, like we would have towards other people. But in this case, it's often towards God. And our circumstances can reveal what's actually there. So we can't control our circumstances, and ultimately, I think maybe some of it has to do with just us not being able to see our own heart very well. And so circumstances tend to be like that pressure in an engine that would force the oil out. That it eventually presses out what's really in our heart. And so I think another challenge might be that we like tangible things. It's hard for us to be content or to have a satisfaction in something that's not tangible. And so that's something that as Christians we're growing in our faith and confidence in God, and that just takes time. And so a lot of times God uses trials to actually strengthen our faith. So as our faith is strengthened, our contentment grows, and so sometimes it's just a matter of time that we need to grow and mature. And so there's lots of different ways. I think probably a lot of it has to come down to, like you were saying earlier, we just don't have a proper view of God, and probably connected to that, a proper view of ourselves.
Yeah. Paul talks about in Romans, and I'm blanking on the chapter, but he talks about giving thanks for the one who has and eats gives thanks, and then the one who has not also gives thanks. So the question is, How can I give thanks for what I don't have? And it must be talking about a disposition or an attitude, right? Towards God, I am thankful in every situation. As you think about challenges that Christians might face in seeking to be more content, how do you put together godly desire for contentment and also desire to want to maybe do more or have more? I don't feel like I'm asking the question very well, but it's not wrong to want to earn money, build a business, or do these kinds of things. But how can I live in those circumstances? And as I was asking the question about challenges to commitment, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is the culture within which we live. We're such a materialistic, focused culture that it's like if you don't have the latest whatever, everyone notices it, and you're looked down upon for that. How can we walk in that world while maybe wanting to have good desires to see certain things happen, but still be content in everyday life?
Right. So if someone came in for counseling, let's say, and they said, I'm really struggling with a difficult marriage and I'm experiencing what we might describe as innocent suffering, I wouldn't just say, just learn to be content. That would not be my first thing that I would go to them. My first thing would be probably if you can get out of a difficult situation, get out of it. So obviously in a marriage that you can't quite get that. Well, let's say you're in a difficult job situation.
Yeah.
If you can get out of that situation, then it's okay to potentially pursue something else that may be less stressful, less whatever. But if you can't, you have to learn how to be content in it. So like that lady, for example, who's coming with a difficult marriage, if she can't get out of it because there's no grounds for divorce, then she needs to learn how to be content in it. So I don't think it's wrong to desire more. Paul had desires for like going to Rome, for example. Not wrong to desire those things, but you have to learn how to be content if God doesn't allow that to happen. And so that's part of just trusting in the providence of God, which is an important part about learning contentment is understanding a little bit more about his providence. But there are going to be some challenges just because we don't see things fully and clearly, and also we just need a little bit of time. And I think we need some of the scriptures to help shape our thoughts rather than just kind of walking through life. But yeah, I think so. I guess your question is on balance. So how do you balance being content with like having desires for better things? And I would say for that, it's if you can go after those better things, and the main desire has to be, how can I please God best? So if I can please God best by having more money or by having a better job or by starting this company, then I'm going to seek to do that. And if God closes that door, doesn't allow that to happen for whatever reason, I still can please God. So that has to be my main desire. Above all, I have to be desiring to please God. And so then no matter what the circumstances, that's where I can always fall back to, well, God has me here, and this is what I'm going to do to please. I'm going to do my best to please him with these circumstances. So that's like Paul in prison.
Yeah, contentment doesn't have to mean complacency. We should always be seeking
Exactly.
how can I best honor God. So when we think about how Paul talked about contentment, right, we see a man who experienced so many different circumstances. I mean, he went from top dog religious leader to beaten and thrown out of cities and persecuted, right? So when he talks about in Philippians 4, he talks about, I've learned the secret to contentment. What do you think he means there?
Oh, like I was saying earlier, I think it is that he recognized that in himself he had enough. I mean, he was self-sufficient in the things that God had provided for him. There's nothing more that he needed. The text that goes on to say that I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I think the all things there actually points back to his being able to be content no matter what the circumstances are. And so it's just something that has to grow. It's this confidence that God is good. He's not punishing me. He's not opposed to me. He's not abandoned to me. But it is that no matter what comes my way, I'm gonna be content. And so the secret is I guess not a secret since Paul's revealing it there for us, but it's actually learning to understand and appreciate God's goodness despite those circumstances, even if we don't like them.
Yeah, and it's such a simple thing to reflect on who God is, what He's done for us. Right, as believers, we've all been rescued from darkness and brought into light. I mean, this is a simple thing, but it's such a difficult thing sometimes to keep front of mind, to keep moving forward on it, because I think sometimes we can just let our circumstances have first place in life, because those are the things that are visible. That, I got to figure out a way to pay the bills this week. That can be such an urgent thing, but doing what Paul's talking about there and seeking to honor God. How can we, as we think about trying to apply and practice contentment, what are some steps people can take if we recognize, okay, this is an area I need to grow in? What might moving forward look like?
I think of at least 4 things. There's probably a lot more, but 4 things. One is perspective. I need to see myself properly before God. So Jeremiah Burroughs says that we have every right to be content, or in other words, we have no right to be discontent. And so he says we need to reconsider who we are and where we came from. Here's how he puts it. Lord, I am nothing. Lord, I deserve nothing. Lord, I can do nothing. I can receive nothing and can make use of nothing. I'm worse than nothing. And if I come to nothing and perish, I will be no loss at all. And therefore, is it such a great thing for me to be cut short here? So what he's talking about there is, I'm cut short and I didn't get the thing that I wanted, or I had a serious loss that I had to experience. And he's saying, is it such a bad thing? And when I consider who I am before God, sometimes when we're saved for a long time, we subtly start to think like Uzziah when he sought the Lord as he rose to power. But then when he became strong, 2 Chronicles 26 says, his heart was proud and he acted corruptly. And we see that in Solomon as well. And we just need to remember what we deserve, that apart from Christ, we deserve condemnation, we deserve separation from God, we deserve punishment, eternal judgment, and think about that in contrast to what we have. So the first is perspective. The second is responsibility. So I think what's helpful for me is to focus on personal responsibility more than unmet needs. Now, everybody experiences loss. Everybody hates not getting the thing that they want. But if I can think about what is my personal responsibility when I have many things and when I have little, well, I can still, that's where we go back to that idea of pleasing God and everything. That's my main desire. I want to please Him. So it doesn't matter if I have a lot or a little. I can still focus on stewarding what God has given to me. The third thing is satisfaction. So recognize where my satisfaction comes from. Burroughs says it this way: the reason that we have not got contentment in the things of the world is not because you have not enough resources from the world. It's because there are not enough things that are proportionable to that immortal soul of yours that is capable of God Himself. It would be like a hungry man opening his mouth in order to be fed by the wind and coming away unsatisfied. The reason is because wind is not suitable for a craving stomach. And so we need to come to a place where we recognize that the thing that we're seeking for most, the thing that will satisfy, is God Himself. That we can say with Jeremiah in Lamentations 3, the Lord is my portion. And he says, now I have hope. So he's changed his perspective when before he was struggling and weary from the loss that he was experiencing and the judgment. Then he turns to reflect on the faithfulness of God and the goodness of God and recognizes that his satisfaction comes from God. And then the fourth thing is providence, which I mentioned earlier, but I think if we think properly about providence, it actually helps us with contentment. Because if God sovereignly orchestrated all the events of the universe down to the smallest of details, then who are we to really get bitter at life or at things when they don't go our way? And so the traffic jam, the the new financial stress that came because of some unexpected issue that came up. In principle, it makes sense. Yes, I need to recognize that all these circumstances are designed by God for His glory and for my good. We could state that, but when we think about God's providence, there are countless gears that fit into the larger engine, let's say, of what God is doing, and we tend to look at the one gear of the circumstance we're experiencing, and we say, "I don't understand how that fits. I don't like that. Why does it have to be there? Why not just remove it?" And we don't like the suffering that we're experiencing. If we think properly about God's providence, we have to recognize that He knows what He's doing, and our bitterness is probably not directed just at inanimate objects or even at another person, but it's probably directed at the God who's ordained all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to catch a vision for a big view of God, that it's actually He's the one who's orchestrated all things. And the verse you mentioned in Romans 8 is so helpful, because if we remember, yes, we might be in a bad circumstance, but ultimately it does work out for our good, right? And looking back, I'm sure lots of people have experiences in life where if we look back, maybe in the moment it wasn't obvious that God was working through that, but we see coming out of that circumstance that actually God was working that out, even in just making me trust Him more. Learning that through a difficult challenge, He's still there. He's still with us.
Yeah, there was when I came to Inner City Baptist Church in 1997, I was not happy about that. We were going to a church in Romulus, and I loved the church, and I was actually getting some pastoral training there at the church, and I had been pursuing pastoral ministry from the time I was in 11th grade in high school, and so that was my plan. That was going to be it. My pastor was going to train me, and when we left that church to come to Inner City Baptist, I didn't like it. And when I thought about the gear of God's providence, I understood God's providence to some level. But when I understood the gear of God's providence, that particular one, I didn't like it. And I for years, I was just kind of grumbling, like in my mind, over this, how terrible this is, and how am I ever going to get the training that I need? I basically have to start over at square one. I have no college. I have no seminary. No church is going to take me as a pastor without any of those things. And so I, obviously, now I'm some 28 years removed from that, and I can see things differently, and I can see how God did orchestrate the events of my life to do exactly what He wanted, and much better than what it would have been if I'd gone that other path. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of our circumstances, we don't always get that clear view of what God might have been doing, because there are some other circumstances in my life, like the loss of my mom, that I don't understand why God did that. I don't have clear answers. I could see so much good that she could continue to do if she were still around today. She'd be in her 70s now, but she's not, and I don't have that answer. But I can be confident because I know that God is good. If I'm confident in God's goodness, I can look back on that and go, I don't understand what you're doing, but it must have been something good. I can see some benefits that came to my life and my siblings and things, but ultimately I have to trust God because I don't know. And I think of Job, he didn't really get all the answers at the end of his life. I don't know that he did as long as he was alive as to why he experienced all that loss. But he had to have confidence, and I think that's what faith is. It's an assurance of things not seen. It's trusting that God, not only that God is, Hebrews 11:6, but that He's a rewarder of those who seek Him. So I just keep seeking Him, even if I don't know all the answers or the end from the beginning. I just know that gear in the working of God's providence has to have some purpose, and I might not know that until the next life what that purpose is.
Right. And the point is we have to keep trusting God through those and be content in that. So, Dr. Elwart, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Theologically Driven. We hope it was a help to you. And if it was and you're interested in this topic, we would love for you to share this podcast with someone so that they might benefit from it too. Theologically Driven is a podcast of Detroit Baptist Theological Seminary. If you would like to learn more about our seminary, you can go to dbts.edu.